My DIL kicked me out in the snow. If you won't clean the floors, get out. Freezing, I helped a man change a flat tire. He said, "You have a good heart." When he took off his hood, I saw my high school sweetheart, now a billionaire. He opened the car door and said something that made me freeze. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." The words hit me harder than the December wind slicing through my thin coat. "If you won't clean these floors on your hands and knees like I asked, then get out. We don't need a lazy old woman taking up space." I stood there in the hallway of what I'd called home for the past 3 years, staring at my daughter-in-law, Indigo. Her perfectly manicured nails drummed against the doorframe as she waited for my response. Behind her, I could see my son Everett sitting on his leather recliner, eyes glued to the television screen as if this conversation wasn't happening 10 feet away from him. "Indigo, please," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the sound of the evening news. "It's snowing outside. Where am I supposed to go at this hour?" She shrugged, her blonde hair catching the light from the chandelier she'd insisted they install last year with money I knew they didn't have. "That's not my problem, Phyllis. You've been living here rent-free for 3 years, eating our food, using our electricity. The least you could do is clean up after yourself properly." Rent-free. The words stung because they weren't true. Every month, I handed over $800 of my $1,200 pension to help with household expenses. That left me with $400 for everything else: my medications, my few personal needs, the occasional coffee with my old neighbor Sarah when she could drive over from the senior complex. "Everett," I called out, hoping my son would finally speak up, would finally defend his mother the way I'd defended him countless times throughout his 38 years of life. "Son, please tell her I can't go out in this weather." He didn't even turn around, just lifted the volume on the remote control until the sound of some crime drama filled the room. The message was clear. He was choosing his wife's comfort over his mother's safety. I looked down at my feet, still wearing the thin house slippers I'd put on that morning when I woke up in the converted storage room they called my bedroom. No windows, barely enough space for a single bed and a small dresser they'd bought at a garage sale. This was what my life had become at 65 years old. "Fine," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'll go pack my things." "Don't take too long," Indigo called after me as I walked toward my room. "We're expecting company later, and I don't want any drama." Company? Probably her sister Melody and that husband of hers who always made jokes about nursing homes whenever I was in earshot. They'd all laugh about this tomorrow, about how they finally got rid of the burden. I pulled my old suitcase from under the bed and began folding the few clothes I owned. 3 sweaters, 2 pairs of pants, some undergarments, and the wool coat my late husband Robert had bought me 20 years ago for our anniversary. Everything I owned in this world fit into one small suitcase. As I packed, memories flooded back. Everett as a baby, colicky and difficult, while Robert worked double shifts at the factory. The years after Robert died when Everett was only 16, how I worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat and pay for his college. The pride in his eyes when he graduated, the promises he made about taking care of me when I got older. Those promises felt like lies now. 20 minutes later, I wheeled my suitcase through the living room. Indigo was curled up on the couch next to my son, both of them watching some reality show about rich housewives. Neither of them looked up as I headed for the front door. "Bye, Mom," Everett called out casually, like I was heading to the grocery store instead of being thrown out into a December blizzard. The cold hit me like a physical blow the moment I stepped outside. Snow was falling heavily, already covering my footprints from this morning when I'd gone to check the mail. The wind whipped through the bare trees lining their suburban street, and I could barely see the house across the road through the white curtain of snow. I pulled my coat tighter and began walking, my suitcase wheels struggling against the accumulating snow on the sidewalk. Each step sent icy water seeping through my thin slippers, and within minutes, I could no longer feel my toes. The streetlights created small circles of visibility, but beyond them was just darkness and swirling snow. Where could I go? Sarah lived 15 miles away, and even if I could reach her, I knew her apartment building had a strict no overnight guests policy. The homeless shelter downtown would be full on a night like this, and I didn't even have enough money for a taxi to get there. I kept walking, more out of instinct than any real plan. The suitcase felt heavier with each step, and twice I had to stop and rest, my breathing visible in small white puffs that the wind immediately scattered. That's when I saw the broken-down car on the side of the road, its hazard lights blinking like a heartbeat in the storm. A figure in a dark coat was kneeling beside the front tire, struggling with what looked like a car jack in the freezing wind. I should have kept walking. Any reasonable person would have. I was a 65-year-old woman with no place to go and no one to help me, dragging a suitcase through a blizzard. But something made me stop. "Excuse me," I called out, raising my voice over the wind. "Do you need help?" The figure looked up, and I could see it was a man, probably in his 60s, with silver hair visible beneath the hood of an expensive-looking coat. Even in the dim light, I could tell his clothes were worth more than everything I owned combined. "Ma'am, you shouldn't be out in this weather," he said, standing up and brushing snow off his knees. "Is your car broken down too?" I almost laughed at the assumption that I owned a car. "No, I was just walking by and saw you needed help. I know how to change a tire." It was true. Robert had taught me years ago, insisting that a woman needed to know how to take care of herself. It was one of the few useful skills I'd maintained through all these years of decline. The man stared at me for a long moment, taking in my soaked slippers, my inadequate coat, the suitcase I was pulling behind me like some kind of refugee. "Ma'am, forgive me for saying this, but you look like you're the one who needs help right now." "I'm fine," I lied, even as my teeth began to chatter. "Really? Let me show you the trick to loosening those lug nuts in the cold." For the next 20 minutes, we worked together in the falling snow. I showed him how to position the jack properly on the icy ground, how to use his body weight effectively on the tire iron. My hands were so cold I could barely grip the metal, but I kept working, grateful to have something to focus on besides my own desperate situation. "There," I said finally as we tightened the last lug nut on his spare tire. "That should get you where you're going safely." He stood up, wiping his hands on a cloth he'd pulled from his trunk. "Thank you. I don't know what I would have done without your help." He paused, looking at me more closely in the light from his car's interior. "You have a good heart, stopping to help a stranger when you're clearly dealing with your own troubles." Something in his voice made me look up, really look at his face for the first time. Even with the years that had passed, even with the lines around his eyes and the silver in his hair, I knew that voice. I knew those eyes. "Michael?" The word came out as barely a whisper. He went very still, then slowly reached up and pulled back his hood, revealing the face I'd fallen in love with 48 years ago in the hallways of Jefferson High School. Michael Chen, the boy who'd promised to write me letters when his family moved to California the summer before our senior year. The boy who'd broken my 16-year-old heart when those letters stopped coming after just 3 months. "Phyllis Elizabeth Morrison," he said softly, and the way he said my full name transported me back to 1975, when we used to meet by our lockers between classes and dream about a future together. "What are you doing here?" I asked, still not quite believing it was really him. "I could ask you the same thing." His eyes moved from my face to my suitcase, to my soaked slippers, and I saw understanding dawn in his expression. "Phyllis, what's happened to you?" Before I could answer, he was moving toward his car, opening the passenger door. "Get in, please. We need to get you warm and dry before you catch pneumonia." I hesitated. This was Michael Chen, my first love, but he was also a stranger now. 48 years had passed. He could be anyone, could want anything. "Phyllis," he said, and there was something in his voice that made me look at him again. "I know this is strange, but I promise you're safe with me." Whatever's brought you out here tonight, whatever's happened, let me help. Please. Maybe it was the cold that was making me lightheaded. Maybe it was the shock of seeing him again after all these years. Or maybe it was just that I truly had nowhere else to go. But I found myself nodding, leaving my suitcase in his trunk and sliding into the warm leather interior of what I now realized was a very expensive car. As Michael started the engine and cranked up the heat, I closed my eyes and tried to process what had just happened. In the span of 2 hours, I'd been thrown out of my home by my own family and rescued by the boy I'd loved half a century ago. "Where can I take you?" Michael asked gently as he pulled away from the curb. I opened my eyes and looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time. The expensive coat, the luxury car, the confident way he carried himself even in crisis. This wasn't the shy teenager I'd known. This was a man who'd clearly done well for himself in the years since we'd lost touch. "I don't know," I admitted, the words catching in my throat. "I honestly don't know." He was quiet for a moment, then reached over and gently squeezed my hand. His fingers were warm and steady, so different from my own trembling ones. "That's okay," he said. "We'll figure it out together." As we drove through the snow-covered streets, the heater finally beginning to thaw the numbness in my feet, I wondered if this was all some kind of dream. After years of feeling invisible, discarded, forgotten, here was someone from my past treating me like I mattered again. I didn't know what Michael Chen had become in the 48 years since we'd last spoken, but whatever else had changed, one thing remained the same. He still made me feel like I was worth saving. Michael took me to the Marriott downtown, the one with the marble lobby and crystal chandeliers that I'd only ever seen from the outside when the city bus dropped me off at the nearby medical center for my doctor appointments. The desk clerk didn't even blink when Michael requested their best available suite, just handed over the key cards with the practiced smile of someone accustomed to wealth. "Mr. Chen, welcome back," she said warmly. "Will you be staying long this time?" "I'm not sure yet," he replied, his hand gently resting on my back as he guided me toward the elevators. "We'll let you know." The suite was larger than the room I'd been living in at Everett's house. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the city lights, now blurred by the continuing snowfall. A gas fireplace cast a warm glow across leather furniture that probably cost more than I'd made in a year, back when I was still working. "Sit," Michael said, gesturing toward the sofa closest to the fireplace. "Let me get you something warm to drink." I perched on the edge of the cushion, afraid to really relax into such expensive furniture with my damp clothes. Michael moved to the suite's kitchenette, and I heard the familiar sounds of someone making tea. It reminded me of Sunday afternoons at my grandmother's house when I was little, the way she'd fuss over guests until they felt completely welcome. "Here." He handed me a steaming mug and settled into the chair across from me, his eyes never leaving my face. "Now tell me what happened tonight, and don't say nothing. I know you better than that, even after all these years." The warmth of the tea seemed to unlock something inside me. Maybe it was the shock of the evening, or maybe it was seeing Michael again, but suddenly I was talking, telling him everything. About Robert's death 8 years ago, about the struggle to live on my small pension, about Everett's invitation to move in with them that had seemed like salvation at the time. "I thought it would be good for all of us," I said, staring into my tea. "I could help with cooking, cleaning, maybe babysit when they had children. I didn't realize I'd become their live-in servant." Michael's jaw tightened. "They made you pay rent?" $800 a month, almost my entire pension. The words tasted bitter. Indigo said it was only fair since I was using their utilities and eating their food, but I was the one doing most of the cooking, most of the cleaning. I think she just liked having someone to order around. "And your son allowed this?" I was quiet for a long moment, remembering all the times I'd hoped Everett would stand up for me, would remember who I was before I became this diminished version of myself. Everett learned a long time ago that keeping Indigo happy was easier than making waves. She has very specific ideas about how things should be done, and she doesn't tolerate disagreement. What triggered tonight's eviction? I almost laughed at how delicately he put it. She wanted me to scrub the bathroom floors on my hands and knees. Said using a mop wasn't thorough enough. When I suggested that at my age, maybe I could clean them effectively without crawling around on the tile, she decided I was being defiant. Michael set down his coffee cup with enough force to make me look up. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with an anger I'd never seen there before. She threw a 65-year-old woman out into a blizzard because you wouldn't scrub floors on your hands and knees? It sounds worse when you say it like that. It sounds like exactly what it is. Elder abuse. He stood up and began pacing to the window, his expensive suit moving with the fluid confidence of someone who'd learned to command rooms. Phyllis, you can't go back there. I don't have anywhere else to go. The admission hung between us like a physical thing. My pension barely covers basic expenses. I can't afford an apartment on my own, even a studio. I looked into senior housing, but the waiting lists are years long. Michael stopped pacing and turned to face me. In the soft light from the fireplace, I could see the boy I'd fallen in love with superimposed over the successful man he'd become. Same dark eyes, same way of tilting his head when he was thinking. What happened to us, Phyllis? He asked quietly. After I moved to California, I wrote you letters every week for months, but you never responded. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. What letters? Michael, I never received any letters from you. He went very still. That's impossible. I sent them to your home address, the same one I'd been to dozens of times. I waited, I whispered, the old pain rising fresh and sharp. I waited for months. I thought you'd forgotten about me, found someone new in California. I thought you were done with small-town girls who weren't sophisticated enough for your new life. Michael sank back into his chair, his face pale. My mother, he said finally. She never liked you, never thought you were good enough for me. She must have. She must have intercepted the letters before they reached you. The silence stretched between us as we both absorbed the magnitude of what his mother had stolen from us. 48 years of wondering, of believing ourselves abandoned or forgotten, when the truth was that someone else had made the choice to separate us. I looked for you, he said eventually. Not right away. I was young and hurt and angry that you'd apparently cut me off completely. But later, when I was older and more successful, I hired investigators. They told me you'd married Robert Morrison and moved away, that you seemed happy and settled. I didn't want to disrupt that. Robert was a good man, I said carefully. We had a good marriage. But Michael, I never stopped wondering what might have been if you'd written, if I'd known you still cared. And now here we are, he said softly. Both of us alone, both of us carrying regrets we didn't even know we should have. I studied his face in the firelight, seeing the lines that spoke of years of hard work and success, but also of loneliness. Tell me about your life. What happened after California? Are you married? Do you have children? Michael smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. I threw myself into work after losing you. Started a software company in Silicon Valley in the early 80s, just as personal computers were taking off. We went public in '92, and I've been expanding into different technologies ever since. That sounds very successful. It is. I'm worth somewhere around $250 million now. He said it matter-of-factly without pride or shame. I married twice. First wife left me for her tennis instructor after 5 years. Said I worked too much, cared more about my computers than her. She wasn't wrong. Second wife lasted 8 years before she decided she preferred the lifestyle my money provided over actually living with me. No children? No. Sarah, my first wife, had a son from her previous marriage. I tried to be a father figure, but when she left, she made sure I never saw him again. Carla never wanted kids, said they'd interfere with travel, with her social calendar. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. What about you? Besides Everett? Just Everett. I had 2 miscarriages after him, and then the doctor said it wasn't likely I'd carry another pregnancy to term. Robert and I talked about adoption, but I trailed off, not wanting to say that we'd never quite had enough money for the process, that every extra dollar went toward Everett's needs and expenses. You put everything into raising him? Everything. I thought about the jobs I'd taken, cleaning offices at night, working retail on weekends, anything to make sure Everett had what he needed. When Robert died, Everett was in his 2nd year of college. I kept working, kept paying his tuition and living expenses. I wanted him to finish, to have opportunities I'd never had. And how did he repay that sacrifice? I was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire. Finally, I looked up at Michael. He married a woman who sees me as competition for his attention and resources, and he chose her comfort over my basic safety. Michael's expression hardened again. He doesn't deserve you. He's my son. That doesn't give him the right to treat you like a burden. Michael moved from his chair to sit beside me on the sofa, close enough that I could smell his cologne. Expensive but not overwhelming, different from the drugstore aftershave Robert used to wear. Phyllis, I want to ask you something, and I need you to really think before you answer. I nodded, suddenly nervous about what he might say. What if you didn't have to worry about money anymore? What if you could live anywhere you wanted, do anything you wanted, without having to depend on people who don't appreciate you? That's not realistic, Michael. I'm 65 years old. I don't have skills that anyone wants to pay for anymore. I don't have savings or investments or... I'm not talking about a job, he interrupted gently. I'm talking about me taking care of you. I'm talking about you letting me give you the life you should have had all along. I stared at him, certain I'd misunderstood. What are you saying? I'm saying I never stopped loving you, Phyllis Elizabeth Morrison. Not in 48 years, and I'm saying that if you'll let me, I'd like to spend whatever time we have left making up for all the years we lost. The words hung in the air between us, impossible and wonderful and terrifying all at once. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the world in white silence. Inside this warm, luxurious suite, the boy I'd loved was offering me a future I'd never dared to dream of. But there was still the matter of my family, my son who'd thrown me out, but who might still need me. There was still the question of whether 2 people could bridge 48 years of separate living and find their way back to love. I don't know what to say, I whispered. Michael reached for my hand, the same way he had in his car, his fingers warm and steady around mine. Say you'll think about it. Say you won't go back to people who don't value you just because you think you have no other choice. I looked around the beautiful room, at this man who'd appeared like a miracle in the middle of the worst night of my life. Tomorrow, I'd have to make decisions about my future, about what came next. But tonight, for the first time in years, I felt safe. I'll think about it, I promised, and saw something that might have been hope light up in his dark eyes. I woke up the next morning in a bed so comfortable I thought I was still dreaming. Egyptian cotton sheets, down pillows that cradled my head like clouds, and sunlight streaming through windows that looked out over a city I'd lived in for 40 years but never seen from this height. For a moment I couldn't remember where I was. Then it all came flooding back. The fight with Indigo, the blizzard, Michael's face in the snow-covered darkness. I sat up slowly, my joints protesting less than they usually did after a night on the narrow bed at Everett's house. Michael had insisted I take the master bedroom while he slept on the sofa, despite my protests. A gentleman doesn't let a lady sleep on furniture, he'd said with a smile that reminded me so much of the boy I'd known that my heart had actually skipped a beat. There was a soft knock on the door. Phyllis, are you awake? I've ordered room service. I wrapped the hotel bathrobe around myself, thick terry cloth that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe, and opened the door. Michael stood there holding a silver coffee pot, still wearing his shirt from yesterday, but looking refreshed in a way that spoke of expensive skincare and good genetics. "Good morning," he said, and there was something almost shy in his voice. "I wasn't sure how you liked your coffee, so I ordered everything." The sitting area had been transformed into a breakfast nook. Fresh orange juice, pastries that looked like they'd come from a French bakery, eggs Benedict, fresh fruit arranged like artwork. I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen so much food that wasn't marked with clearance stickers from the grocery store. "This is too much," I protested, but Michael was already pulling out a chair for me. "It's been 48 years since I got to have breakfast with you," he said. "Let me spoil you a little." As we ate, Michael talked about his business, his travels, the house he'd built in Napa Valley that he rarely had time to enjoy. I found myself relaxing in a way I hadn't in years, laughing at his stories about difficult clients and technology disasters. This was the Michael I remembered, funny, kind, interested in everything I had to say. "What about you?" he asked as I finished the best croissant I'd ever tasted in my life. "What did you do before you retired? Besides raising Everett, I mean." I felt the familiar flush of embarrassment. "Nothing very exciting. I worked at a dry cleaner for 23 years after Robert died. Before that, I did whatever I could. Cleaning offices, retail, some waitressing. Just survival jobs, really." "Don't do that," Michael said firmly. "Diminish yourself. You kept a family together, raised a son, survived losing your husband, adapted to whatever work you could find to make ends meet. That takes tremendous strength and resourcefulness." I was saved from having to respond by the ringing of my old flip phone. The caller ID showed Everett's number, and my stomach immediately clenched with anxiety. Old habits die hard. Even after being thrown out in a snowstorm, my first instinct was still to worry about my son. "I should probably take this," I said apologetically. Michael nodded. "Of course, I'll be right here." I answered on the fourth ring. "Hello, Everett." "Mom, where the hell are you?" His voice was tight with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. "Indigo's been calling around looking for you all morning. She's worried sick." Worried sick, after throwing me out in a blizzard. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so painful. "I'm fine," I said simply. "I found somewhere warm and safe to stay." "Where?" "With that Sarah woman?" "Because I called her place and she said she hadn't heard from you." I glanced at Michael, who was pretending to read a newspaper but clearly listening to every word. "I'm staying with an old friend." "What old friend?" "Mom, you don't have any friends with money. I can tell you're somewhere fancy. I can hear it in the background. What's going on?" There was something in Everett's voice that I'd never heard before. Not concern for my well-being, but something that sounded almost like panic, as if my being somewhere fancy was somehow threatening to him. "It doesn't matter where I am," I said. "I'm safe, I'm warm, and I'm being treated with respect. Something I haven't experienced in your house for quite some time." "Mom, don't be dramatic. Indigo was just having a bad day yesterday. You know how stressed she gets. Come home and we'll work this out." "Work what out exactly?" "The fact that I pay $800 a month to be treated like hired help. The fact that your wife thinks it's appropriate to demand I scrub floors on my hands and knees? Or the fact that you sat there and watched her throw your mother out into a snowstorm without saying a word?" Silence on the other end. Then, "She said you could come back if you apologized." The words hit me like a physical blow. After everything that had happened, after I'd nearly frozen to death on the streets because of their cruelty, they wanted me to apologize. "Goodbye, Everett," I said quietly, and hung up before he could respond. Michael looked up from his newspaper. "Everything all right?" "They want me to apologize," I said, still staring at my phone. "For what? Refusing to be abused?" Before I could answer, my phone rang again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize. "Hello? Is this Phyllis Morrison?" The voice was female, young, with an edge of barely controlled hysteria. "Who is this?" "This is Indigo. I'm using my sister's phone because you're not answering when I call from mine. I almost hung up immediately, but something in her tone made me pause. Gone was the cold authority from yesterday. Instead, she sounded frantic, desperate in a way I'd never heard before. What do you want, Indigo? I want to know where you are and who you're with. Her voice was shaking. Everett said you're staying somewhere expensive, with some friend who has money. I need to know who it is. Why? Because. She paused, and I could hear her breathing heavily. Because I know everyone in your social circle, Phyllis. You don't have friends with money. So either you're lying about where you are, or something else is going on. Michael was watching me now, his expression concerned. I put the phone on speaker so he could hear. I don't owe you any explanations, I said. Yesterday you made it very clear that I wasn't welcome in your home, so my whereabouts are no longer your concern. Phyllis, please. The desperation in Indigo's voice was unmistakable now. I'm begging you. Just tell me who you're with. What's his name? His name. Interesting that she automatically assumed it was a man, and interesting that she was so panicked about it. Why does it matter? I asked. Because. Another long pause. Because what if he's dangerous? What if he's taking advantage of you? I'm worried about you. Michael raised an eyebrow at that, his expression shifting from concern to something colder. You're worried about me, I repeated slowly. After throwing me out in a blizzard because I wouldn't scrub your bathroom floor. That was a mistake, Indigo said quickly. I was stressed. I wasn't thinking clearly. But this is different. This is about your safety. Something clicked in my mind. How do you know I'm somewhere expensive, Indigo? What? You said Everett told you I was somewhere fancy, that he could hear it in the background. But I was just talking to him on the phone. How would you know about expensive surroundings unless you were listening in on an extension? Silence. Then, I was just worried. Or unless you've been doing research, I continued. Unless you've been trying to figure out who I might be with and what that could mean for you. Michael leaned forward, suddenly very interested in the conversation. I don't know what you're implying, Indigo said, but her voice was getting higher, more strained. I'm not implying anything. I'm asking directly. What are you really afraid of? A long pause. Then, in a voice so quiet I almost didn't hear it. What's his name, Phyllis? Please, I just need to know his name. I looked at Michael, who nodded slightly. His name is Michael Chen, I said clearly. The sound that came through the phone was like air being sucked out of a room. Complete dead silence for so long that I thought the call had been disconnected. Indigo, are you there? When she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. Michael Chen. The Michael Chen who owns Chen Technologies? Now it was my turn to be surprised. I looked at Michael with raised eyebrows. You know who he is? I asked. Oh, God, Indigo breathed. Oh, my God. Phyllis, where are you right now? What hotel? How do you... What hotel, Phyllis? Please. I looked at Michael again, confused by the sudden shift in Indigo's entire demeanor. He was frowning now, clearly trying to piece together why my daughter-in-law would know who he was. The Marriott downtown, I said finally. Don't go anywhere, Indigo said, her voice now urgent in a completely different way than before. Don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. I'm coming down there right now. Indigo, what's wrong? How do you know Michael? I don't know him personally, she said, speaking so fast the words tumbled over each other. But Everett works for Henderson Construction, and they've been trying to get a contract with Chen Technologies for 2 years. It would be the biggest deal in the company's history. Phyllis, do you understand what this means? I felt something cold settle in my stomach as the pieces began falling into place. What does it mean? It means you're sitting next to a man who could change our entire life with one phone call. It means you have power now, real power, and I was. Oh God, what have I done? The desperation in her voice was complete now, all pretense of authority or control gone. She'd gone from treating me like a burden to realizing I might be the key to everything she'd ever wanted. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, she said. "Don't do anything until I get there, please, Phyllis, I'm begging you." The line went dead. I set the phone down and looked at Michael, whose expression had gone completely unreadable. "Henderson Construction," he said quietly. "Your son works for Henderson Construction." "You know them?" Michael's smile was cold, nothing like the warm expressions I'd been seeing all morning. "Oh, I know them very well. They've been sending proposals to my company for months, calling my assistants, showing up at my office building trying to get meetings. Very persistent people." "Everett mentioned some big contract they were hoping for," I said slowly. "He's been working overtime, staying late, bringing work home. Indigo kept talking about how this deal could change everything for them financially. And now she realizes that the woman she threw out in the snow is personally acquainted with the man who controls that contract." Michael leaned back in his chair, and for the first time since I'd met him again, he looked every inch the powerful businessman he'd become. How interesting. The irony of the situation was starting to sink in. For 3 years, I'd lived in their house feeling like a burden, like someone they tolerated out of obligation. And all this time, I'd been one chance encounter away from having something they desperately wanted. "What are you going to do?" I asked. Michael was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the city below. When he looked back at me, his expression was thoughtful. "That depends," he said finally. "What do you want me to do?" For the first time in years, someone was asking what I wanted, instead of telling me what I should accept. The power dynamic that had defined my life since Robert's death was shifting, and I wasn't sure how to handle it. 20 minutes later, we heard frantic knocking on the suite door. "That'll be them," I said quietly. Michael stood up, straightening his shirt. "Ready?" I thought about yesterday, about scrubbing floors, about walking through the snow with nowhere to go, about feeling invisible and disposable. Then I looked at Michael, at the luxury surrounding us, at the future he was offering. "Ready," I said, and meant it. When Michael opened the door, Indigo practically fell into the room. She'd clearly thrown on whatever clothes were closest: jeans, a wrinkled sweater, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Behind her stood Everett, looking confused and uncomfortable. "Mr. Chen," Indigo said breathlessly, extending her hand. "It's such an honor to meet you. I'm Indigo Morrison, and this is my husband Everett. We're so grateful you helped Phyllis last night." Michael shook her hand politely but didn't smile. "Mrs. Morrison, Mr. Morrison." Everett stepped forward, clearly still trying to understand why his mother was having breakfast with one of the most successful businessmen in the state. "Mom, we need to talk. This whole thing has gotten out of hand." "Has it?" I asked, remaining seated at the breakfast table. "Which part? The part where your wife threw me out in a snowstorm, or the part where you let her do it?" Indigo shot her husband a look that could have cut glass, then turned back to Michael with the kind of desperate charm she usually reserved for people she needed favors from. "Mr. Chen, I hope you understand that this was all a terrible misunderstanding. We love Phyllis dearly, and we've been worried sick about her." "Worried enough to call the police when she went missing?" Michael asked mildly. Another silence. We knew she was resourceful," Everett said weakly. Michael nodded slowly, as if this explained everything. "I see. So resourceful that you felt comfortable letting a 65-year-old woman wander around in a blizzard rather than, say, apologizing for your wife's behavior and asking her to stay." "Now wait just a minute," Everett said, some of his usual defensiveness returning. "You don't know the whole story. My mother can be. Difficult sometimes, set in her ways." I felt something snap inside me. Difficult? Because I didn't want to crawl around on bathroom floors? That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? The words came out louder than I intended, and for the first time in years, I didn't care who was uncomfortable with my anger. Please, enlighten me. Enlighten Mr. Chen. Tell him exactly how difficult I've been while paying $800 a month to live in your storage room and clean your house. Everett's face flushed red. Mom, you're embarrassing yourself. No, Michael said quietly, but his voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being heard. I think you're embarrassing yourself. And your wife. The room fell silent except for the sound of Indigo's rapid breathing. I could practically see her mind racing, trying to figure out how to salvage a situation that was spiraling completely out of her control. Mr. Chen, she said finally, her voice artificially sweet. Perhaps we could discuss this privately. I'd hate for family dynamics to interfere with business relationships. Michael's smile was razor-sharp. Business relationships, Mrs. Morrison? I wasn't aware we had one. Well, no, not yet, but Henderson Construction has been hoping— Yes, Michael interrupted. I know exactly what Henderson Construction has been hoping. The question is, what makes you think I care about their hopes now? The weight of his words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Indigo's face went white as she realized that her treatment of me hadn't just cost her a free housekeeper and babysitter. It had potentially cost them their financial future, and I was just beginning to understand the true power of my position. The silence that followed Michael's words was deafening. I watched as Indigo's face cycled through a range of emotions: confusion, hope, desperation, and finally, dawning horror as she began to understand that her cruelty hadn't just burned a bridge with me, but potentially destroyed their entire future. Mr. Chen, she said carefully, as if speaking to a wild animal that might bolt at any sudden movement. I know we got off to a bad start, but surely we can work past this. Family disagreements happen. They don't have to affect business. Michael walked over to the window, his hands clasped behind his back as he looked out over the city. When he spoke, his voice was conversational, almost casual. You know, Mrs. Morrison, I've been in business for over 30 years. I've seen every type of person you can imagine: the brilliant, the ruthless, the desperate, the entitled. But there's one type I refuse to do business with under any circumstances. He turned around, and the expression on his face made Everett shift uncomfortably. I don't work with people who abuse those who can't defend themselves. Indigo's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. It wasn't abuse. It was just a family argument that got heated. You threw a 65-year-old woman out of her home during a blizzard, Michael said, his voice cutting through her protests like a blade, because she wouldn't scrub your bathroom floor on her hands and knees. You took $800 a month from her pension and gave her a storage room to sleep in while treating her like unpaid domestic help. What would you call that? She's being overly dramatic, Everett said, finally finding his voice. My mother has always had a flair for making herself the victim in any situation. The words hit me like a slap, but before I could respond, Michael stepped forward. I'd never seen anyone's demeanor change so completely, so quickly. The gentleman who'd held my hand and ordered me breakfast was gone, replaced by someone who radiated the kind of power that had built a $250 million empire. Mr. Morrison, he said, his voice deadly quiet. I suggest you choose your next words very carefully. Something in Michael's tone must have penetrated Everett's self-righteousness, because he actually took a step backward, but he wasn't smart enough to stay quiet. Look, I don't know what sob story my mother told you, but there are two sides to every story. She's lived with us rent-free for 3 years. $800 a month, I said quietly. I paid $800 a month. That barely covered utilities, Everett. The single word from Michael was enough to make my son's mouth snap shut. I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to listen very carefully. Yesterday morning, I finalized the purchase of Henderson Construction. The color drained from both Indigo's and Everett's faces simultaneously. "What?" Indigo whispered. "I bought the company," Michael said matter-of-factly. 73% controlling interest. The previous owners were having financial difficulties. Apparently, they'd overextended themselves trying to land contracts they weren't quite qualified for. I thought it might be a good addition to my portfolio. Everett sank into one of the suite's expensive chairs as if his legs had given out. You own Henderson Construction?" "As of 9 a.m. yesterday morning, yes. Which makes me your boss. Both of your bosses, actually." Michael's smile was cold. "Interesting how these things work out, isn't it?" Indigo made a sound somewhere between a sob and a gasp. "We didn't know. We had no idea you knew Phyllis. If we had known—" "You would have treated her differently?" Michael asked. "You would have shown basic human decency only if you'd known there might be consequences." "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" I asked, standing up for the first time since they'd arrived. "Because it sounds exactly like what you meant. You're only sorry because it turns out I know someone with power over your lives." Indigo turned to me, tears streaming down her face, all pretense of authority completely gone. "Phyllis, please. I made a mistake. I was stressed about money, about Everett working so much, about everything falling apart if he doesn't get promoted. I took it out on you and that was wrong." "You're right," I said calmly. "It was wrong. Just like it was wrong when you made me give up my bedroom so you could have a craft room. Just like it was wrong when you told your friends I was your live-in helper instead of Everett's mother. Just like it was wrong when you spent 3 years making me feel like a burden in my own son's home." "I can make it up to you," she said desperately. "We can give you the master bedroom. We can stop charging you rent. We can—" "You can what?" Michael asked. "Continue abusing her just with better accommodations?" Everett finally found his voice again. "Now wait just a damn minute. Nobody asked you to get involved in our family business. Your mother was dying of hypothermia on the side of a road," Michael said, his voice rising for the first time, "because you and your wife threw her out into a blizzard. How is that not my business when I'm the one who found her?" "She could have called someone." "Who?" Michael demanded. "Who should she have called? What network of friends and family should a woman have been able to rely on when her own son abandoned her in a snowstorm?" Everett's mouth opened, but no sound came out. For the first time, he seemed to be grappling with the reality of what they'd done, not just to me, but to themselves. "Mr. Chen?" Indigo said, her voice breaking. "Please don't let this affect Everett's job. He's worked so hard. He's been with Henderson for 8 years. This is between you and me, not him." "Is it?" Michael asked. "Because from where I'm standing, Mr. Morrison was sitting right there when you threw his mother out into a blizzard. He had plenty of opportunities to object, to defend her, to show even basic human decency. Instead, he turned up the volume on his television." I watched my son's face as Michael spoke, saw the moment when the full implications of his inaction finally hit him. For 38 years, I'd made excuses for Everett, told myself he was just young, just selfish in the way all children can be, just influenced by his wife. But he wasn't a child anymore. He was a grown man who'd watched his mother be abused and chosen his own comfort over her safety. "Mom?" Everett said, his voice small in a way I hadn't heard since he was little. "I'm sorry. I should have stood up for you." "Yes," I said simply. "You should have. Can you forgive me?" I looked at my son, really looked at him, for what felt like the first time in years. I saw Robert's nose, my own stubborn chin, the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. But I also saw the man who'd let his wife treat me like a servant, who'd sat silent while I was thrown out into a deadly storm, who'd just called me dramatic for describing my own abuse. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I don't know if I can." Everett's face crumpled. "What do you want me to do? How can I make this right?" Michael spoke before I could answer. You can start by understanding that your actions have consequences. As of Monday morning, you're both being transferred to the janitorial division. What? Indigo shrieked. You can't do that. Everett is a project manager. He has a college degree. Had, Michael corrected. He had a position as a project manager. Now he has a position emptying trash cans and mopping floors, effective immediately. This is insane, Everett said, standing up so quickly his chair nearly tipped over. You can't destroy our lives because of a family argument. I'm not destroying anything, Michael said calmly. I'm simply demonstrating that actions have consequences. You both seem to have trouble with that concept. We'll sue, Indigo said wildly. This is wrongful termination, workplace retaliation. For what? Michael asked. I'm not firing you. I'm reassigning you to positions better suited to your character. Surely people who think it's appropriate to demand an elderly woman scrub floors on her knees shouldn't object to doing some floor scrubbing themselves. The brutal logic of it hit them both like a physical blow. They'd set the terms: manual labor as punishment, cleaning as humiliation. Now they were going to live by those same terms. How long? Everett asked quietly. That depends, Michael said, looking at me. Phyllis, what do you think would be appropriate? The question surprised me. For 3 years, no one had asked my opinion about anything that mattered. Now I was being asked to determine my son's fate. I think, I said slowly, that depends entirely on whether they're genuinely sorry or just sorry they got caught. We're sorry, Indigo said quickly. We're genuinely sorry. Are you? I asked. Are you sorry for treating me badly, or are you sorry that treating me badly turned out to be expensive? Neither of them answered, which was answer enough. Michael nodded as if this confirmed something he'd already suspected. I think 6 months of janitorial work might give you both some perspective on the value of treating people with dignity, regardless of their circumstances. 6 months? Everett's voice cracked. We can't survive 6 months on janitor wages. The mortgage? The car payments? Then perhaps you'll gain some appreciation for what your mother managed on $1,200 a month while paying you $800 of it, Michael said without sympathy. I watched as the full weight of their situation settled over them. Everett had never been without financial security, had never faced the kind of struggles I'd dealt with for years. Indigo had built her entire identity around being married to a successful man, around the status and security that came with middle-class respectability. What do you want from us? Indigo asked, her voice hollow. It was the first time either of them had asked what I wanted instead of telling me what I should accept. The question hung in the air between us, heavy with possibility and pain. I want to matter, I said finally. I want to be treated like a person instead of a burden. I want respect for the sacrifices I made and the love I gave. I want you to understand that throwing someone away doesn't make them worthless. It just makes you cruel. Can you teach us how to do that? Everett asked, and for the first time since he'd arrived, I heard something real in his voice. Not manipulation or desperation, but genuine regret. I looked at my son, at his wife, at the mess they'd made of their lives in a single evening of cruelty. Then I looked at Michael, who was watching me with the same patient attention he'd shown 48 years ago when I was trying to solve a difficult math problem. I don't know, I said honestly, but maybe we can find out. Michael stepped closer to me, his hand finding mine with the same gentle certainty he'd shown in the car last night. Whatever you decide, you don't have to face it alone anymore. As I stood there between my past and my future, between the family that had failed me and the love that had found me again, I realized something important. For the first time in years, I had choices. Real choices, backed by real power, and I intended to use them wisely. 3 days passed in a strange kind of limbo. Michael had extended our stay at the hotel while I tried to sort through the wreckage of my old life and figure out what I wanted my new one to look like. Each morning, I woke up in luxury I'd never imagined. And each evening I fell asleep wondering if I deserved any of it. Michael was patient in a way that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with him all those years ago. He didn't pressure me to make decisions, didn't try to convince me that choosing him was the obvious answer. Instead, he simply existed beside me, solid and reassuring, while I wrestled with 48 years of conditioning that told me family came first, no matter how badly they treated you. On the third morning, while Michael was downstairs in a business meeting with some clients who'd flown in from Seattle, I received a call that changed everything. "Mom?" Everett's voice was different somehow, quieter, more uncertain than I'd heard it in years. "Hello, Everett. Could you meet me somewhere? Just you and me? I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but I need to talk to you. Without Indigo, without Michael Chen, just us." I was quiet for a long moment, looking out the hotel window at the city below. "What makes you think I want to talk to you?" "Because you're my mother," he said simply. "And despite everything I've done, despite how badly I've screwed this up, I'm still your son. I have to believe that means something." An hour later, I sat across from Everett in a small diner downtown, the kind of place where the coffee was strong and nobody cared if you lingered over your meal. He looked terrible, his hair unwashed, his clothes wrinkled, deep circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and desperate worry. "You look like hell," I said, and was surprised to hear a note of maternal concern creep into my voice despite everything. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I feel like hell, Mom. I've been thinking about what happened, really thinking about it, and I need you to know something." "What's that?" "I remember now. I remember being little and Dad leaving, and how scared I was that you might leave too. I remember you working all those jobs, coming home exhausted, and how I used to think that if I was just good enough, perfect enough, you'd never have to work so hard." His eyes filled with tears, and for a moment I saw not the 38-year-old man who'd betrayed me, but the frightened little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. "But then I grew up," he continued, "and somewhere along the way, I started taking all those sacrifices for granted. I started thinking they were just what mothers did, not something special you'd chosen to do for me. And when Indigo came along, you found someone who told you that you were the center of the universe," I said quietly. "And it was easier to believe that than to remember how hard I'd worked to make your world possible." "She made me feel important," Everett admitted. "Successful. Like I deserved to be taken care of instead of being the one doing the taking care of. And gradually, she convinced me that you were clingy, demanding, that you expected too much from us." "What did I expect, Everett? What was too much?" He was quiet for a long time, stirring sugar into coffee he wasn't drinking. "Respect," he said finally. "You expected to be treated with respect in your own son's home, and somehow, Indigo made that seem unreasonable." I felt something inside my chest begin to loosen, just slightly. Not forgiveness, not yet, but recognition. For the first time, Everett was seeing our situation clearly, without Indigo's interpretation coloring his perception. "Why now?" I asked. "Why are you able to see this now?" "Because I spent the last 3 days mopping floors," he said with bitter laugh. "And every time I got down on my hands and knees to scrub something, I thought about you, about how Indigo demanded you do the same thing, and how I sat there and let it happen. I thought about what it must have felt like to be 65 years old and treated like a servant in your own son's home." "How did it feel?" I asked. "The floor scrubbing?" "Humiliating. Demoralizing. Like I was being punished for something I couldn't quite name." He looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion and shame. "Is that how we made you feel every day?" "Most days," I said honestly. "God, Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry." The apology hung between us, raw and real in a way that felt different from his desperate pleading in Michael's hotel suite. This wasn't about getting me to come back or trying to fix his financial problems. This was about genuine recognition of harm done and pain caused. "What about Indigo?" I asked. "How is she handling her new position?" Everett's expression darkened. "She's not. She called in sick the first 2 days, then showed up yesterday and lasted about 3 hours before having what I can only describe as a complete breakdown. Started screaming at the supervisor, demanding to speak to Michael Chen directly, threatening to sue everyone from the janitor to the CEO. Did she speak to Michael? No. Security escorted her out of the building. She's been fired, Mom. Completely fired. And she's—" He paused, struggling with something. "She's blaming you for everything. Says you manipulated the situation, that you planned this somehow. She's talking about taking legal action against you for intentionally sabotaging her life." I felt a cold anger settle in my chest. Even now, even after everything that had happened, Indigo couldn't accept responsibility for her own actions. "And you?" I asked. "Do you believe that?" "No," Everett said firmly. "No, I don't. I think you were just trying to survive in our house, and we made that as difficult as possible. I think when someone finally treated you with kindness, you responded to that kindness. There was no manipulation, no planning, just basic human need for dignity." We sat in silence for a while, both of us processing the magnitude of what had been broken and what might possibly be repaired. "What happens now?" Everett asked finally. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Michael has asked me to move in with him. He wants to take care of me, to give me a life I never imagined possible. And I'm seriously considering saying yes." "You should," Everett said, surprising me. "Mom, you should absolutely say yes. Even though it means leaving you behind?" "Especially because it means leaving me behind." He reached across the table and took my hand, his fingers rough from 3 days of manual labor. "I need to figure out who I am without Indigo telling me. I need to learn how to be a man who stands up for the people he loves instead of a man who takes the easy way out. And I can't do that while you're still there trying to take care of me." "What about your marriage?" "What marriage?" Everett laughed bitterly. "Indigo moved in with her sister yesterday. Said she couldn't stand to look at me, knowing I was the reason her life fell apart. She wants a divorce, wants half of everything, and she's probably going to get it. The house will have to be sold, the car's repossessed. I'll probably end up in a studio apartment somewhere, starting over at 38 years old." "I'm sorry," I said, and was surprised to discover I meant it. "Don't be. This is what I deserve. This is what we both deserve." He squeezed my hand. "But you, Mom, you deserve so much better than what I gave you. If Michael Chen can provide that, then please, please don't let guilt over me stop you from taking it." I studied my son's face, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden agenda, but found only exhaustion and genuine remorse. "There's something I need to know," I said. "If Michael wasn't involved, if there were no consequences for how you'd treated me, would you still be sorry?" Everett was quiet for a long time, really thinking about the question. "I want to say yes," he said finally. "I want to believe I would have eventually seen how wrong we were. But honestly, I don't know. I might have just kept making excuses, kept believing Indigo's version of events. It might have taken something this dramatic to wake me up. At least you're being honest." "I'm trying to be. For the first time in years, I'm trying to be completely honest about who I am and what I've done." He paused. "The question is, can you ever forgive me? Not today, not next week, but someday?" I looked at my son, really looked at him, and tried to separate the man sitting across from me from the little boy I'd raised. He'd hurt me deeply, betrayed every sacrifice I'd made, chosen comfort over loyalty. But he was also genuinely remorseful. genuinely committed to change, genuinely willing to face consequences without trying to shift blame. I don't know, I said finally, but I'm willing to find out. Relief flooded Everett's face. That's more than I deserve. Maybe, but it's what I'm offering. We talked for another hour about his childhood, about the mistakes we'd both made, about the possibility of rebuilding something real between us someday. When I finally stood to leave, Everett stood too, hesitating for a moment before pulling me into a hug. I love you, Mom, he whispered against my hair. I know I haven't shown it, but I do love you. I love you too, I said, and felt some of the ice around my heart begin to thaw. But love isn't enough anymore, Everett. There has to be respect. There has to be consideration. There has to be proof that you value me as a person, not just as a mother who exists to serve your needs. I understand. And I'll spend however long it takes proving that I can be the son you deserved all along. When I returned to the hotel, Michael was waiting for me in the suite sitting area, reading a book and sipping tea. He looked up when I entered, his eyes searching my face for clues about how the meeting had gone. How was it? He asked gently. Hard, necessary, maybe hopeful. I sat down beside him on the sofa, suddenly exhausted by the emotional weight of the day. He's genuinely sorry, Michael. Not just sorry for the consequences, but sorry for the pain he caused. And how do you feel about that? Confused, relieved, still hurt, but maybe not as hopeless as I was before. I leaned back against the soft cushions, closing my eyes. He told me I should say yes to you, said I deserved better than what he'd given me. And what do you think? I opened my eyes and looked at Michael, this man who'd appeared in my darkest moment like something from a fairy tale, offering me a future I'd never dared to dream of. I think, I said slowly, that I'm tired of making decisions based on other people's needs instead of my own wants. Michael set down his book and turned to face me fully. What do you want, Phyllis? I want to wake up every morning in a bed that's actually mine. I want to drink good coffee and read books and have conversations with someone who values my thoughts and opinions. I want to travel and see things I've never seen and eat at restaurants I've never been able to afford. I want to be someone's first choice instead of their last resort. And I want to do all of that with you, I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. I want to see who we could have been if your mother hadn't intercepted our letters. I want to find out if two people can fall in love again after 48 years apart. Michael's smile was radiant, transforming his entire face. Is that a yes? That's a yes, I said, and felt the last chains of my old life fall away. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. I was hoping you'd say that. Inside was the most beautiful ring I'd ever seen. Not the traditional diamond solitaire I might have expected, but a vintage emerald surrounded by tiny diamonds, elegant and unique and perfect. It was my grandmother's, Michael said as he slipped it onto my finger. She wore it for 63 years, through good times and bad, through war and peace, through poverty and prosperity. I want you to wear it for whatever time we have left, whether that's 3 years or 30. I stared at the ring, at the way it caught the light, at the way it looked on my hand like it belonged there. What about Everett? I asked. What about the possibility of reconciliation? What about it? Michael asked gently. Phyllis, choosing to build a life with me doesn't mean you can never speak to your son again. It just means you're not going to sacrifice your happiness for his comfort anymore. If he wants a relationship with you, he can earn it on your terms, not his. The wisdom of his words settled over me like a warm blanket. I didn't have to choose between love and family. I could choose love and insist that family prove themselves worthy of it. So what happens now? I asked. Now, Michael said, we go home. We start the life we should have started 48 years ago, and we don't waste another single day on regret. As he kissed me for the first time since we were 17 years old, I realized something important. Sometimes the most radical act isn't forgiveness or revenge. Sometimes it's simply choosing yourself. Choosing your own happiness, your own worth, your own future. And for the first time in my adult life, that's exactly what I was doing. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of Michael's house in Napa Valley, watching the sunrise paint the vineyard gold through windows that stretched from floor to ceiling. The kitchen was larger than the entire apartment I'd shared with Robert in our early married years, but somehow it felt intimate rather than overwhelming. Maybe because Michael had filled it with touches that made it ours. My grandmother's recipe box on the counter, photos from our recent trip to Italy on the refrigerator, herbs growing in small pots along the windowsill that I tended each morning. I was making pancakes, a skill I'd perfected during those lean years when Everett was young, and fancy breakfasts were the one luxury I could afford to give him. The irony wasn't lost on me that now, when I could afford to have a chef prepare anything I wanted, I was choosing to cook for the simple pleasure of it. "Something smells incredible," Michael said as he entered the kitchen, his hair still damp from his morning shower. Even at 66, he moved with the energy of a much younger man, though I'd learned to recognize the small signs of contentment that had softened his edges since we'd been together. The way he hummed unconsciously while reading. The way he reached for my hand without thinking whenever we walked together. "Blueberry pancakes," I said, flipping the last one with perhaps more flourish than necessary. "I found fresh berries at the farmer's market yesterday." "The same farmer's market where you spent 45 minutes discussing soil composition with that young organic grower?" Michael asked with amusement, wrapping his arms around my waist from behind. "His technique was fascinating," I protested, leaning back against his chest. "I never had the opportunity to learn about gardening when I was younger. Too busy working, too tired when I got home." "And now?" "Now I have time to be curious about everything I missed." I turned in his arms, struck again by how natural this felt. How right. "Speaking of which, the community college called yesterday. My application for their photography class was accepted." "That's wonderful." Michael's smile was proud in a way that still made my heart flutter. "When do you start?" "Next Tuesday. 3 days a week for 8 weeks. The instructor said we'll be working with both digital and film cameras, learning about composition and lighting and developing our own style." "You sound nervous." I was nervous. At 65, I was returning to school for the first time since my high school graduation. But it was a good kind of nervous, the kind that came from anticipation rather than fear. "A little. It's been a long time since I was a student." "You'll be brilliant," Michael said with the confidence of someone who'd watched me master everything from his complicated coffee machine to the art of wine tasting in the months since I'd moved in. "You have an eye for beauty. You just need to learn the technical skills to capture what you see." As we sat down to breakfast, Michael's phone buzzed with a text. He glanced at it, then at me, his expression carefully neutral. "Everett?" I asked. Michael nodded. "He wants to know if you're free for lunch today. Says he has something important to tell you." I'd been having monthly lunches with my son since I'd moved to California. They were still careful affairs, both of us learning how to navigate this new dynamic where I wasn't responsible for managing his emotions and he wasn't entitled to my unconditional support. But they'd been getting easier, more genuine, as Everett slowly proved he was serious about changing. "What do you think he wants to talk about?" I asked. "I suspect it has to do with the papers his lawyer filed yesterday." I raised an eyebrow. Michael's business connections meant he often knew about legal proceedings before the people involved did. "What papers?" "Divorce papers. Everett filed for divorce from Indigo yesterday morning, citing irreconcilable differences and requesting no spousal support." I set down my coffee cup, surprised by the relief I felt. In the 6 months since everything had fallen apart, Indigo had made several attempts to reconcile with Everett, each one more manipulative than the last. She'd tried tears, threats, promises of change, and when those failed, she'd attempted to use their mutual friends to pressure him into taking her back. "How do you feel about that?" Michael asked carefully. Relieved, I said honestly. As long as he was still married to her, there was always the possibility that she'd convince him to go back to old patterns. This feels like finality. It is finality. She can't hurt you anymore, Phyllis. She has no power over your life or your relationship with your son. An hour later, I sat across from Everett in the same diner where we'd had our first honest conversation 6 months ago. He looked different, thinner but healthier somehow. His hair was shorter, his clothes simpler, and there was something in his posture that suggested he was more comfortable with himself than he'd been in years. "You look good," I told him, and meant it. "I feel good. Different, but good." He smiled, and for the first time in years, it reached his eyes. "Mom, I need to tell you something important, and I want you to hear it from me before you hear it from anyone else. The divorce papers." His eyebrows shot up. "You already know?" "Michael has his sources. How are you feeling about it?" Everett was quiet for a moment, stirring cream into his coffee with the same absent-minded concentration he'd had as a child when he was thinking through something difficult. "Relieved," he said finally. "Scared, but relieved. For the first time since I married her, I feel like I can make decisions based on what I think is right, instead of what will keep peace in the house." "What changed your mind? Last time we talked, you were still trying to save the marriage." "Last time we talked, I was still trying to save the person I thought she could become instead of accepting who she actually is." Everett looked up from his coffee. "She came to see me last week, wanted to discuss reconciliation. But the whole conversation was about what you and Michael had taken from her, how her life had been destroyed by your selfishness. Not once did she acknowledge what she'd done wrong. Not once did she take responsibility for her own actions. And that bothered you?" It terrified me. Because I realized that if I took her back, I'd be choosing to spend the rest of my life with someone who thinks cruelty is justified as long as the target can't fight back. Someone who sees kindness as weakness and respect as something that has to be earned through submission. I felt something ease in my chest that I hadn't even realized was still tight. For months, I'd been afraid that Everett's remorse was temporary, that eventually Indigo would find a way to convince him that I was the real villain in their story. "There's something else," Everett continued. "I've been going to therapy, individual therapy, not couples counseling. I needed to understand how I became someone who could sit quietly while his wife abused his mother. What have you learned? That I spent most of my adult life looking for someone who would make me feel important without requiring me to actually be important. Indigo made me feel like a success without demanding that I succeed at anything that mattered. She made me feel like a good person without requiring me to do good things. The insight was more profound than I'd expected from my son, who'd never been particularly introspective. Dr. Martinez, my therapist, helped me understand that when you sacrifice for someone without them acknowledging the sacrifice, it can create resentment instead of gratitude. I think that's what happened with us. You gave me so much, worked so hard to provide for me, and I started taking it for granted instead of being grateful for it. You were a child, Everett. Children are supposed to take their parents' love for granted. But I wasn't a child when I married Indigo. I wasn't a child when I let her treat you like a servant in our house. I was a grown man who chose comfort over courage, and that's something I have to live with." We were quiet for a moment, both of us processing the weight of his words. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now I figure out who I am when I'm not trying to please someone who can't be pleased. I keep working. Michael has been fair about letting me earn my way back to a better position, though I'll never take that for granted again. I keep going to therapy. I keep working on becoming someone you can be proud of instead of someone you have to make excuses for." "I'm already proud of you," I said softly. "Maybe not proud of all your choices, but proud of your willingness to face them honestly and do better. That means everything to me." Everett reached across the table and took my hand. "Mom, I need you to know that I understand now why you chose Michael. I understand that you deserve happiness and security and love that doesn't come with conditions attached. I'm not asking you to choose between him and me. Good, because I wouldn't. He laughed. I figured that out when I saw how you looked at each other in that hotel room. I haven't seen you smile like that since before Dad died. Michael makes me happy in a way I'd forgotten was possible. Then I'm happy for you. Really, genuinely happy. Everett paused, then added, I do have one request, though. What's that? When you're ready, when you feel like our relationship is stable enough, I'd like to meet him properly. Not as the man who destroyed my life, but as the man who gave my mother a chance to start over. I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes. I think that could be arranged. And maybe sometime I could see your new house, see where you're living, meet your friends, be a part of your life instead of expecting you to revolve around mine. I would love that. As I drove back to Napa Valley that afternoon, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. 6 months ago, I'd been a woman who believed her worth was measured by how much others needed her, how much she could sacrifice, how small she could make herself to fit into spaces that weren't designed for her comfort. Now I was a woman who woke up each morning in a bed that was actually mine, in a house where my opinions mattered, next to a man who saw my happiness as essential to his own. I had friends I'd met at the community center, hobbies I was exploring for pure pleasure, and a son who was learning to value me as a person rather than taking me for granted as a resource. When I pulled into our driveway, Michael was in the garden, pruning roses with the careful attention he brought to everything he cared about. He looked up when he heard my car, his face lighting up with the kind of uncomplicated joy that still amazed me. How did it go? He asked, pulling off his gardening gloves as I approached. Better than I hoped. He filed for divorce. He's staying in therapy. He wants to meet you properly and see our home. Our home, Michael repeated, as if testing the words. I like the sound of that. So do I. That evening, we sat on the deck overlooking the vineyard, sharing a bottle of wine from grapes that had been growing on this land longer than we'd been alive. The sunset painted everything golden, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt completely at peace. Do you ever regret it? Michael asked, his hand finding mine in the gathering twilight. Leaving your old life behind? Never, I said without hesitation. I don't regret fighting for my dignity. I don't regret choosing happiness over obligation. And I don't regret giving us a second chance. Even if it meant hurting Everett. I didn't hurt Everett. His own choices hurt him. I just stopped absorbing the impact of those choices for him. I turned to look at Michael, this man who'd saved me in more ways than one. You know what I regret? What? I regret that it took me 65 years to learn that love without respect isn't actually love at all. I regret all the years I spent believing that being needed was the same thing as being valued. And now? Now I know the difference. I lifted our joined hands and kissed his knuckles, tasting the lingering sweetness of wine. Now I know what it feels like to be chosen instead of settled for. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, I thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago, standing in the snow with nowhere to go, believing herself to be burden and a disappointment. That woman could never have imagined this life, this love, this profound sense of belonging. But she'd had something this woman needed to remember. The strength to keep going even when everything seemed hopeless. The courage to help a stranger change a tire even when she was drowning in her own problems. The dignity to maintain her values even when no one else respected them. Those qualities hadn't disappeared when my circumstances changed. They'd simply been given space to flourish in soil that nourished rather than depleted them. Thank you, I said to Michael as we prepared to go inside. For what? For seeing me, for valuing me, for proving that it's never too late to start over. Thank you, he replied, for having a heart good enough to stop and help a stranger on the worst night of your life, for being brave enough to trust me with your future, for teaching me that love is even more beautiful the second time around. As we walked into our house together, I realized that some stories don't end with dramatic confrontations or perfect reconciliations. Sometimes they end with quiet contentment, with the simple joy of being known and cherished, with the profound satisfaction of a life rebuilt on your own terms. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't defeating your enemies. It's walking away from battles that were never yours to fight in the first place. Sometimes the most powerful choice isn't forgiveness or revenge. It's simply choosing yourself. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, choosing yourself leads you back to a love you thought was lost forever, and forward to a future more beautiful than any you dared to imagine. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.